Most blur effects either blur the entire frame evenly or blurred in one direction, such as horizontally or vertically. Radial blur effects work in a more circular pattern. They make all the blur rays go out from a central point, or they make it look like the image is being spun around very quickly. Now there's 3 different radial blurs that come with After Effects. One is the stock Adobe effect, and 2 that come bundled with Cycore effects, which come free with After Effects. Let's go through all 3 of them, show you their strengths and weaknesses, and talk about how you might use them in a real project. Here's a candidate for a radial blur effect. It's a case where I want to keep the face sharp and maybe make the blur lines emanate out from that face. Select the layer, and apply Effect, Blur and Sharpen, and first we'll use the radial blur effect that Adobe's created. Now this one's based on Photoshop's radial blur, and you'll see it has a custom UI that kind of gives you an idea of how much blur is going on. The default is spin, and you'll notice that the outer areas do look like they're being rotated very fast. There is a center, so I can go ahead and center the blur right between his eyes, so I can keep that in focus while the rest is spinning around him. And you'll see that I have a graphical user interface here where I can go ahead and either move around the center, put it back to where it was, or just use a very precise crosshairs to put it where I want to be. And I can either scrub the amount parameter to increase the amount of spin blur, or drag the slider underneath and see how the diagram changes. Now, unfortunately, the image does not update till I release the mouse, then I see my updated blur. And we'll go back to something a little more reasonable. Now there's 2 basic types of radial blurs. There's the spin and there's the zoom, where pixels seem to shoot away as if you're zooming in very fast on this object. These are funner with a bit more amount, so you really get some rays out of the image. And that's kind of a nice stylized look. Go back to something more reasonable here. There's one more parameter in the Adobe blur that I really like, and that's the anti-aliasing. You can set it to high to get a better quality blur, but I actually like the low setting. It's a bit grainier of a blur and reminds me of a little bit more of a filmic look than a high quality blur. I know, a little crazy, but that's how I am. I like a little bit of noise in my images sometimes. So that's the Adobe blur. Let's go ahead and look at some of the other blurs. So I'll remove this one, and instead I'll apply Effect, Blur and Sharpen, CC Radial Blur, the CC version of this effect. It has a lot of things that are very similar. It has an amount parameter, and it has a center. I'll put it between his eyes again. But it has some different blur types. Scratch, which is a little bit different sort of rotation. Rotate, where the image actually seems to be rotating around the screen. And again, as you play around with the amount parameter, it goes in either direction. I'll go to something more reasonable again. And then the more normal type of zoom blurs. Straight zoom, which comes out from the image. Fading zoom, which has a little bit different of a positioning. And centered zoom, which keeps the original size but has some edge issues. A little bit later on, I'll actually compare these side by side to make it easier to see the differences between them. Remove that one and apply Effect, Blur and Sharpen, CC Radial Fast Blur. Now, it's not merely a faster version of Radial Blur, it has different options as well. Select it, set my center right between his eyes again, increase the amount, and it has a few different parameters. There's this standard zoom, which looks very much like a light ray sort of effect, and then a couple of variations, brightest or darkest, which looks at the colors and the luminance values of the pixels to determine how to shoot out the image. Darkest and brightest. Some cool special effects. So don't see this and think it's just a faster version of Radial Blur. It's actually a light rays effect and also creates some other very interesting looks.